Welcome to What's Your St. John's Story, a 30-minute segment sponsored by St. John's United, highlighting connectivity within our community through storytelling. I'm Rachel Simonson with the St. John's Foundation. Today we're talking about spiritual care with our pastoral care team, Karl Guhn and Melanie Forreys. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Karl, tell us a little bit about how you came to find St. John's.
There's a long and a short story, and I'll tell the shorter one. When I came to Billings in the year 2004 as the pastor at Messiah Lutheran Church was one of the ownership congregations of the original ownership congregations of St. John's. And so there was natural linkages between the congregation and St. John's. So as the pastor and the congregation, we did volunteer work and other things at St. John's. And then the CEO at that time, Kent Burgess, asked me if I would serve on the board at St. John's. And I was on the board for 3 years when the then director of pastoral care decided to retire. And because of my background and experience, Kent asked me if I would become a part of the St. John's pastoral care team. And so that's how I ended up connected at St. John's.
It's funny when you end up on the board how you end up with a position at St. John's.
It can.
In the same way, yes. And Melanie, what has been your journey to find St. John's? You are a seminary student, Luther Seminary out of St. Paul, but distance learning, and you are in your internship year. So tell us how you found St. John's.
Well, 2 years ago, I had the opportunity of exploring pastoral care with Pastor Guhn, and that was when I first became familiar with St. John's. And so when it came time to discern an internship placement that would work for myself and my family, St. John's felt like the right place. St. John's normally partners with an ELCA congregation, and so this year I get to spend part of my time at St. John's each week and part of my times at Lutheran Church of the Good Shepherd.
And you mentioned the ELCA, that's the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. And like I said, you are a seminary student, so this is really your practicum year, correct? Where you actually get hands-on learning about what it's like to be in full-time ministry.
Yes, so much learning. I could never have been prepared for all of it, and it's been wonderful.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about your experiences as an intern with St. John's, but I'm going to give Karl a chance to talk a little bit more about spiritual care at St. John's, our approach to spiritual care, our connection with the church, the Lutheran Church. Karl, just tell us more.
Well, as I mentioned, when I was pastor at Messiah was one of the original ownership congregations of St. John's. And there are 27 now, I think, ownership congregations at St. John's. So we're deeply integrated with congregational life in the institution of the ELCA, and we're what's referred to as a social ministry organization of the church. And a social ministry organization is a concern for the poor. It's a concern for those who might be disenfranchised otherwise, or just simply factors of society that don't receive a lot of attention. And so the church had started the nursing home, actually an independent living, assisted living facility at first called Chapel Court, to help with elders who couldn't live at home anymore, but still needed a home to live, and they could receive care. And so that's kind of some of St. John's history in the church. So the church has always been an integral part of that development and life. And so pastoral care has always been central to the care as well of the elders and the residents of St. John's. In other words, we care not only for their physical being and for their emotional and social being, but we also care for their spiritual well-being and making sure that what is important and a priority for them in life happens there at St. John's as well. And that can take many forms, and that kind of gets into what we do as a department and as a team. We do a lot of visitation of elders and provide support for families and their loved ones, particularly as often happens in an elder environment at the time of death and dying. There's a couple of things that we prioritize. One of those is first and foremost to make sure that the elder has the spiritual care and support that they need. A definition I've always worked with around spirituality actually comes from Webster in under spirit, and the definition is the animating principle held to give life to physical organisms. So one might ask the question, what animates you? And that's your sense of spirit. And for an elder, it may be family, there may be food, there may be entertainment, might be music, all different kinds of things that are important to an elder. And so we try to make sure that those things are happening for that individual. And that cuts across all religious lines and no religious lines. So whether a person has an identified church group that they're a part of or faith group that they're a part of or not, we still provide care and presence with them. It's also important as the end of life approaches that they have the care and the support that they need at that time. And so we provide what we call vigil care, which is a presence with a dying elder, so that no one dies alone is the phrase that we use, which is really important. And we also then provide religious care for the elders, making sure that they have access to their pastor or priest or rabbi or imam or whatever is necessary for them to have. So we've made calls to the local synagogue, and we made calls to St. Thomas the Apostle, who covers St. John's for the Catholic faith, and just about every pastor in town at one time or another we've called for one of their elders needing support or wanting support. And then we also provide worship services around campus, about 13 a week at the various nursing stations around the campus, the various locations. So very active in both that spiritual care being what we call a pastoral presence to people, and religious care as they need it and require it. And that's part of the experience we try to give the intern, which is being a part of that. And if you want to talk about some of your experiences.
Yeah, one of the gifts I think of being an intern at St. John's is that I get to experience and participate in all the different ways pastoral care is a part of daily life on campus, spiritual care. I get to spend time with staff. I get to connect with elders and their families, and I get to take a call. One of the most special things to me about the pastoral care department at St. John's is that we are on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that is one of the ways that we provide care for all of the things that Pastor Karl mentioned. And so as the intern, I have an opportunity to cover one of those 24-hour periods every week and learn to respond to some of the most human, the hardest, and the holiest moments that we experience as people who live and people who die.
Absolutely. I have been privileged to be part of that vigil team, and it is, I think early on in some of our conversations, Pastor Karl, that accompaniment, that presence, that just being with somebody in that moment between life and death. And it is a very precious moment, and it is important that if we say nobody dies alone. Now I realize some people wait till we leave the room and they do die alone. However, I think it's very comforting to the families to know that even if they can't be there, that somebody is present. And it's not just the two of you. Talk a little bit about the pastoral care team, because that is really a unique aspect of St. John's United. This type of senior living consortium really doesn't often have more than one chaplain. How many chaplains do we have?
We have 3 of us who are full-time, and a part-time music director who also serves as a chaplain in one of our other facilities off the main campus. And then we have our pastoral intern as well. So the chaplain department consists of both Lutheran pastors and at this time a Baptist minister as well, who's a part of our staff. We've had folks from the United Church of Christ serve. We've had Methodists serve as chaplains as well. So it's not just Lutherans tending to Lutherans. It really is a broader experience than that. And we've had a lay Catholic gentleman that has served as a chaplain as well.
Who
You know,
now lives at Mission Ridge, right?
I-
Or did?
he actually lived on Chapel Court for a
Chapel
little
Court
while.
for a while.
Yep.
Okay.
So,
All right.
you know, there are many stories that come with sitting and being with elders, and the one that I like to tell that I think kind of sums up the ministry there the best came from an elder who is long since gone now, but he was 100 years old, and every now and then I would get a call from a staff person who would say, you need to come see him because he thinks he's dying. And I'd come in, I'd knock on his door, and he'd say, "Pastor, come on in." He goes, "What are you doing here?" And using his name, I'd say, "You're scaring people." And he'd look at me kind of funny, and he'd start laughing. And he goes, "Oh, that's right. I asked that nurse what she thought about life and death." And then he would smile, and he goes, "I like to know what people think about life and death. After all, it runs in my family." You know, life and death is a part of the cycle of things in everyone's life. And, you know, the goal is to help people to live all the way to that last breath, so that they are able to do the things they want to do and experience what they want to experience, and die with a sense of completion and shall we say, even restfully, peacefully. And so that's an important part of the work we do.
Absolutely. Well, and our tagline at St. John's United is "So much life to live."
Yep.
And there is so much life to live, not just for those who are residing in the skilled care, the nursing home, what you might typically think of St. John's, but our independent living areas. We've got the child care, and pastoral care team touches all of those aspects. Talk a little bit about the children's portion of the ministry that we provide at St. John's.
I'm going to let Melanie talk about that because she's more active in it.
Wonderful.
It's one of the blessings of being at St. John's with pastoral care. Every week I get to go and spend some time with our friends at the Center for Generations. And I often get to go with our music director, Kristen, as well, and sing songs that have nothing to do with anything but the weather, and they're wonderful. But I also get to sit down and talk with the 3-year-olds and the 4-year-olds about what they're experiencing. We talk a little about God. We talk about big feelings. And my presence there is really to listen and to share and to engage with them. And they're the smartest, most special little people there on campus.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And pre-COVID, those moments with the pastoral care team often happened out in resident areas, primarily at Chapel Court. And I think that's one of the things that so many of us miss seeing is the kids around and doing their active singing and learning with the pastoral care intern and music director. Well, one of the other things that is really interesting is that pastoral care does not just provide care spiritually for residents. You mentioned staff. Talk a little bit about how important it is for staff to feel your presence on a regular basis.
We provide a lot of support, I think, for staff, you know, and that's oftentimes where a lot of the diversity of faith connections come from. That staff, our staff is a very diverse group of individuals in relationship to belief and feelings around God and other issues like that. And it's not a matter of trying to convert people or whatever. It's really a matter of meeting people where they're at on their journey, and the staff experience crises themselves, whether it's with their own loved ones or the loss of an elder that they're very close to. So at the time of death, we have a ritual that tries to honor all of those relationships, and we gather around the bedside of the elder who's died with the family if they're there, and offer a prayer of thanksgiving for that person's life, and because we were honored to be able to take care of them, and that's a privilege and an honor. And then the staff will share stories with the family, and the family with the staff around you know, who they were, because sometimes we get to see a side of the elder that the family doesn't see, you know, when they're in a time of extreme need and vulnerability, and see a part of them that completes the picture, as it were, sometimes for the family. But we also have certain programs in place to help staff and assist staff, whether it's counselors through our family service program, but also an employee needs fund when employees have too much month at the end of the money and they need some support or care. We Pastoral Care helps anonymously support employees in those moments as well.
Yeah.
So I tell my colleagues that I'm actually the senior pastor in the largest congregation in the Montana Synod, because I have a congregation of about 750 employees and over 500 residents, so, and then a staff of 3.5 to care for it all,
Yeah.
plus an intern. So
It really is quite
Yeah.
an operation.
yes.
Last month you offered something new for the staff that you hadn't done before, or at least not in my tenure, the Blue Christmas service. And I thought that was really meaningful because you've been very attentive to how difficult the last 2 years have been for staff, and really being purposeful and intentional about letting them have some space to just talk about, or just come and say, you know what, it's Christmas and I don't feel like it. What was that? How well was that received?
To be honest with you, don't know. You know, we had a brief worship service as a part of it at a certain time, and there were a couple people who came down for that. But through the day, we left the space open, and so people got to come and go as they wished, and nobody was checking in on them. And I haven't looked at the security cameras, so you know. I got a lot of emails that indicated an appreciation for the fact the space was there and was available. Some folks said, I'm not going to be able to get there, but I'm glad it's there, and I'm glad you're thinking of that, and that's how I'm feeling this year. And you know, in a couple of cases, there were some personal stories and requests for prayer and those kinds of things of what was going on in their lives. I think one of the key things we have done during COVID and some of the lack of connection is we send out what we call spiritual tidbits every week from the chaplains, and I have sent out, it's been a little less frequently recently, but what I call a Sunday missive, just a little piece about things to think about and reflect on as you're dealing with COVID and living in that kind of an environment. How do we do that, and how do we deal with the unknown and when things are uncertain? So we try to provide support in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, they are wonderful missives, and the spiritual tidbits are always really to the moment and thinking about what staff might be feeling in any particular day or week. It's been very helpful. Melanie, I'd like to ask you a little bit, because you are in a learning experience and you chose to go into the ministry, and you perhaps had a vision for what ministry might look like when you are ordained. How has the experience at St. John's changed or shaped how you want to live out your calling as a pastor?
When I first started my seminary journey, a wise person told me the ministry happens in the interruptions, and I've held that very close to my heart. And at St. John's, there are interruptions that happen all the time, and it's been a gift to learn how to put aside my own agenda and schedule and vision for how things should be and just be present with people. And so sometimes being a pastor looks like helping with the drink cart on a wing that's short-staffed, or losing badly at cribbage to a resident who was patient enough to teach me. And sometimes it looks like showing up to a call of someone dying on Christmas Eve and being present with their family as they say goodbye. And in all of these moments, God is there touching our humanity, and I have seen that in ways I never could have expected, and it's been a gift.
How wonderful. And what is your expectation for when you are done with your internship? You will have another year of seminary work, or you go right into ordination and the call process to a congregation?
That's the hope. My internship is called a I think it's called a culminating internship
Yes.
now,
Okay.
sometimes called a terminal internship, which sounds worse. But the hope is that I will go through the approval process of candidacy and then enter the first call process when I finish internship. And I'm hoping that there won't be a long space between there, but there's a lot of mystery in that, and this has been an adventure so far, so I'm not, expect is a big word that I'm trying not to lean hard into.
Sure. Well, and that's part of just listening for that call, isn't it? Yeah. So in our final few moments, just touching briefly, because I think there is some still myth out there in the community. We used to be St. John's Lutheran Ministries, and we removed that Lutheran from our name because there was some misunderstanding that one had to be Lutheran to live or work for the organization. And just talk a little bit about the breadth of people we serve, a little bit deeper.
Well, I think part of the Lutheran witness, theologically and historically, has been to serve, and not in a sense of Lutherans only or anything like that, but to be present in the world where there's pain, where there is hurt and where there is need, and not for the purpose necessarily of trying to convince people to become Christian, but rather to live out our Christian lives, to try to be an image of Christ in the world. And that started early on in the Lutheran tradition and witness, and it started when Martin Luther chided the German princes for not caring for the poor over who they had authority. He said, if there's somebody that's hungry or somebody without clothing, that's your fault. And charged the princes to care for the least of these under their care. And so that's always been a part of our witness. And so we don't ask what is your faith? We don't ask, do you want to convert? And, our question is, how can I help? How can I serve? And that's just an important, vital dimension of what it means to be Lutheran.
Thank you for sharing that. Well, in our final few minutes, one of the things that we always end this segment with is if I were to run into you out in the community somewhere, perhaps at the grocery store or just on the street, and were to ask you, what's your St. John story? I'm going to start with Melanie. What would you say?
Well, when I have tried to explain what St. John's is like to fellow interns or my family, words often fail me when I try to get into how large and diverse and wonderful St. John's is compared to what we might traditionally picture as a nursing home. And then I always lean into St. John's is like a family. And it's a very large family. But for the short year that I'm here, I get to be a part of it. And that has already blessed me so tremendously.
Wonderful. And Karl, I will let you have the final words. What's your St. John's story?
For all that I've been connected because of ministry and parish life and being an employee, my St. John's story really began when my mom came and was a resident at St. John's. She was in a senior living complex back in New Jersey that was just difficult to navigate for her to get her needs met. And in talking with my siblings, we decided that it would be good if she could come out to St. John's. And it was at St. John's that she found the support she needed and a place where she could blossom and flourish again, have connections with people and social engagement, but also get the medical care that she needed, which at first was just as simply as making sure her meds were sorted and available to her in the proper order, and then moved and progressed to her being given her meds and making sure she was taking them appropriately. As her dementia increased, a higher level of care was available for her in one of our memory care cottages. And again, she had an opportunity to retell all her stories to a whole new group of people, which she did with pride and joy and delight. And then when she had an event, the heart issue, and we were able to get St. John's Hospice involved. And so care was there all the way through, and even as an employee there, I can honestly say that's not unique. That's what happens, and for families. And I was honored and privileged to be able to be a recipient of that care as well. Was able to hold her hand as she died, and with a hospice nurse there next to me as well. And so, that's what I'll remember with St. John's, more than being an employee and more than being a pastor there, is the care my mom received.
Yeah.
So.
And you as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for taking time today to share your St. John's story. Thank you for the good work that you do at St. John's on behalf of the residents and on behalf of the staff. It is important work. You're making a difference in the lives of others, so thank you so very much for that.
You're welcome.
And that is another episode of What's Your St. John's Story? Thank you for watching, and we'll be back again to share more with you next time.
For generations, St. John's has united us with its uplifting vision and lives it has touched. There are thousands of stories about St. John's. Prayers answered for a long-awaited adoption, pain-free relief after healing from injury, settling into a new home for the next phase of life, the comfort of compassionate end-of-life care, the joy that comes from volunteering, and at-home help that supports the fullest life. At St. John's, we are creating community and bringing families together. We offer many services for home, health, and family, from childcare, support for an unplanned pregnancy, and physical therapy, to home health care, senior living services, and hospice care. For all times of life, we are here for you. The heartwarming stories of St. John's are woven into the fabric of our community. What's your St. John's story?